start recording, and we're going to go straight into it. So, as I said, my name is Mark Wyman. I'm going to lead this session today on Dynamics NAV, the foundation for your future solution. The agenda for today is, first of all, to have a look at NAV 2013. Why choose NAV 2013 R2 over your current ERP solution? We're going to be talking about NAV as either a cloud, a hosted, or a hybrid solution, and talking about the choice of client. And then I'm going to go into a short demo of NAV 2013, so showing you what the software looks like. This is not going to be a lot of PowerPoints today. We're going to focus on the software as we get into it. So when we have a look at NAV 2013, NAV has been around for quite a while, and the focus of Microsoft in terms of the development of the solution has focused in a number of areas. First of all, individual productivity. Today I'm going to show you that through the use of the role centers in Dynamics NAV, and we're going to have a look at charts, timesheets, filtering enhancements, link sharing, Excel integration, the ribbon, OneNote, calling options, and shortcut keys. Again, the whole basis here is that NAV is a Microsoft product. It is delivered around the Microsoft framework. It uses the Microsoft tools, and it looks and feels and works like a Microsoft product. So for your staff that currently use the Office suite, will already feel familiar with the user environment, the user experience of Dynamics NAV. In the area of financial management, there have been a number of improvements in the product, including general ledger entries, dimension entries, cash flow, cost accounting, and some rate change tools and reporting around VAT or GST as it's known in the Australian context. In the area of warehouse management, again, some significant improvements around inventory, bin management, integration to service management, and advanced data capture, so for integration into barcoding and RF reader devices. While in the general area of supply chain management, we've seen some improvements around the area of assembly, planning parameters, inventory availability views, and the way that calculations are performed around that. So we're taking a broad-based ERP platform and enhancing it with functionality, and the roadmap from Microsoft continues this enhancement into the future. For those of you who may be familiar with previous versions of NAV, so if we look back at former versions of NAV, NAV 5, NAV 2009 as being previous releases, NAV 2013 introduced some significant enhancements, and some of those enhancements were around the provision of NAV in the cloud. Originally, NAV was a product that was delivered as a client-server environment, so what was known as the classic client connecting to a SQL server or the old NAV proprietary database. In addition to that, a service tier was provided through the Navision application server, which allowed access through third-party or additional applications and devices. But essentially, we were talking a client-server environment. With NAV 2009, and indeed in some respects NAV 2013, what Microsoft have delivered is a true three-tier architecture environment. Again, we're talking about SQL Server as the database environment. On NAV 2009, there was still the potential to do some delivery in the old database, but essentially that has now dropped. The old NAV proprietary database is completely dropped, and we're talking Microsoft SQL Server. What that does is introduces all of the features and benefits of SQL Server into the Dynamics NAV environment. In addition to that, what Microsoft introduced was a role-tailored client. So in other words, now moving away from what was known as the classic client, a menu-driven system, into a role-tailored experience. And I'll show you what that means in a second. In NAV 2009, you still had the option of connecting with a classic client, and you still had the option of the Navision application server being a service tier to connect. So those options were still available. With NAV 2013, however, the classic client drops away completely. So for those of you who may be current NAV users and are familiar with the old NAV classic client, and I'll put my hand up there having worked with NAV for about 15 years now, the classic client is no longer and is completely replaced with the role-tailored client. What does that mean? In reality, not a lot. All the functionality exists in the role-tailored client, but instead of it being a menu framework, it is now framed around the role of a person in the organization. But it also means that the old Navision application server has now been removed, and all of that service tier functionality exists in the Dynamics NAV server, which means that the role-tailored client itself, instead of connecting to the SQL server, connects directly to the NAV app server, which then allows us to introduce 64-bit processing. So now we have the additional power of 64-bit processing, and on top of that, that now exposes the functionality of NAV to SharePoint. So now we have a SharePoint client that uses the Microsoft SharePoint Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar, SharePoint Foundation is the free component of Windows Server, and that enables us to expose Dynamics NAV to as a SharePoint client. In addition to that, through Internet Information Services, we now have a web client, which means that we can deploy NAV using a web client, a role-tailored client, or a SharePoint client, or all three of the above in a single environment. And this is what makes NAV now enabled for the cloud. There is a separate NAV administration tool for the technical people, which enable the management of the NAV server. What this means for you, however, is that it gives you choices. First of all, at a client level, you can choose between using the Windows client, the web client, or a SharePoint client, or in fact, for some people, all three. I work in the office. When I log in the office, I use the Windows client. When I'm on the road and traveling, I use the web client. When I'm connecting through a portal, I use SharePoint. So all of those options are available. And also from a deployment perspective, it means it gives you a choice. So you can deploy Dynamics NAV on-premise. So you can have your own server infrastructure, your own hardware running NAV on your own premises. You could have that partner hosted. You could have a hosting partner which deploys all of the hardware, and you simply have Dynamics NAV hosted by them. Or you could use the Microsoft hosting environment, Windows Azure, which means you can put Dynamics NAV in the cloud, and you can connect to that as a service environment. And the webinars that will follow this one in the Trilogy series will deal with those two aspects: how to deal with NAV in the cloud, how to deal with your services in the cloud, including Office 365. Now, a very short history lesson on Dynamics NAV for those who may not be aware. This is the first version of NAV that was ever released. This goes back to about 1984, although the screenshot was taken in 1996. The actual system was deployed in about 1984. Following it up with what was known as DOS in a box, and you can see there the Danish origins. It was all written in Danish, single language accounting system with finance, debit, debtors, creditors, ledger, and general information. Moving to the first iteration of what was known as Navision back in about 1998. So this was the first iteration of Navision, and you can see the menu-driven structure. Through that, we then move to what many of us who've been around for a while would have known as NAV or Navision 2.0, which was really just the financial basis of the system. So the origin of the product was a financial system. Moving into Navision version 3, which is known as Navision Attain, which saw the merging in of the operational functionality around distribution and manufacturing into Dynamics NAV. And then moving into NAV version 5 or 2009, again depending on whether you're looking at it through the classic client or the role-tailored client. The classic client looked at it very much the same, and the first introduction of the SharePoint portal. So that's just a little bit of a history lesson in terms of Dynamics NAV and where it came from. And what I'd like to do now is switch over to the product and show you Dynamics NAV. The first part that I'm going to do over here is I'm going to log into Dynamics NAV. And you will see over here the role-tailored client. The first thing I'd like to mention about this is that I'm running this in the cloud. This is a true cloud deployment where I have this deployed on the Windows Azure platform. This is running out of the Microsoft Azure data center up in Singapore. And you can see here I'm operating the role-tailored client. I actually have two clients available. In a short while I'll switch over to the web client and give you a view of the web client for Dynamics NAV. Having a look at this, what you can see here is the Microsoft look and feel and layout of this. The whole basis here is that it does look and feel like a Microsoft product, and therefore the whole framework of the product takes on the familiarity of Microsoft. You'll see the ribbon bar. Again, if you're familiar with Office, you'll understand that as a ribbon bar. You'll understand that looks a lot like Outlook. And at the top, we have very much an Internet Explorer style look and feel. So for users who are familiar with the context of Microsoft, this is not a scary environment. It is the same. And again, I can access all the functionality through here. In this case, I've logged in as the accounting manager, and as the accounting manager, my role center is focused around accounting. Finance, the chart of accounts, suppliers, invoices, etc. If I logged in differently, I would be able to see the other functions over here. So changing roles, I can see manufacturing, job costing, resource planning, purchasing, warehouse, and so on. So the basis of my role gives me a role center, and within the role center I have access to the specific functionality that I need. The whole role center page, one of the benefits of the role center is that I can change that as an end user. In other words, it gives me the ability to personalize that. In the middle, I have some key activities, shortcuts to things I commonly use. I have some graphs, the things I want to keep an eye on. And I can change this page simply by going in here and saying, I want to customize this page. Now, the word customize is perhaps not quite the right word over here. It's more personalized because I'm not actually customizing anything. All I'm doing over here is I am changing the layout of this page. So going in over here, in a second when my screen comes back to me. While I'm waiting for that, let me just switch over and go into the web client. And I'm just going to restart the web client because it went to sleep while I was talking. And what you'll see over here in the web client is exactly the same as what I'm showing you here in the NAV Classic client. So back into the classic client. In being able to change that page, you'll see I've got charts over here. Well, there's a blank chart over there. Let's get rid of that. Let's remove that. I'll take that delayed production orders off. Customer sales, I'm not really interested in customer sales. Let's take that one off. But perhaps what I am interested at looking at is another chart, but I want to add one in over here that is more specific, and I might say I want to have a look at customer sales and profit because that's important to me. Let's drop that on there, go OK. And what that now does is that changes the page for me to add in those particular parts. So again, what we're doing here is we're tailoring this page to the way that we want to see it. There we go. So now I've got my new graph down here. We've changed the look of this. We've got a graph in here. One of the other things that Microsoft have also introduced into the product is the concept of user search. It's always a thing that as a user, when I'm looking for something, I often forget where is it in the menu structure. I perhaps haven't used it for a while and I don't know. So over here in the menu structure is the search function, and simply selecting search, if I go here and select vendor, I can see here's all the forms about vendors. So I want to see vendors, and now it'll come up and it'll give me the vendor master form over here. There's the vendor master form with all of my vendors. One of the other things is that that Microsoft have done is they've also enabled a thing called fact boxes. Now, using that function I showed you earlier, I can switch that off or switch it on depending on whether I want to see it. But what fact boxes are is a very important function that enables me to access key information very quickly. For example, this supplier has an outstanding balance of $342,000. What makes it up? Select that, and that will enable me to drill down and see every transaction that makes up that particular outstanding balance. In this case, it's a single invoice as an opening entry against that. So full drill down through those transactions. What is also important over here, if you notice, I have links, I have notes, and I also have OneNote. Let's have a look at those. Links enable me to link any information to this particular record. In this case, I've linked a particular document to this, and selecting that enables me to open that particular document. And if I open that document, that's now going to open the viewer, and on the view of that, I will see that particular document. It's just going to take a little while. Let's close that down, that document. The other thing over here is that if I use the OneNote integration, now for those of you who may not be familiar, OneNote is a Microsoft application that allows you to keep track of multiple pieces of information around one particular transaction. The key thing with that though is that OneNote exists locally on my laptop. Remember I said this application is running in the cloud out of Singapore. Because of the integration with Office, it knows that and understands that if I select OneNote here, it now goes to my local OneNote and publishes that information. So it's created a link through from my local OneNote back to my cloud instance of NAV using the same and appropriate security so that I can access that information. Similarly, over here is if I had to say I want to take that list of suppliers and I want to send that to Excel. Now if you think about the classical problem here in a remote access environment as applications might have been, I would have been accessing this via a terminal server environment. That's how I would have accessed it from a remote server. In the terminal server environment, when I selected I wanted to put the information into Excel, it would create an Excel instance locally on the terminal server, which I would then have to get to my local machine. In the cloud instance over here, it gives me the option. I can either open it or save it locally. I'm going to select open, and what that's now going to do is it's preparing that data and it's pushing it into the local instance of Excel. Again, this topic is going to come up in a lot more detail tomorrow when we talk about the integration with Office 365, because again, although I'm doing this locally here with an Excel, in an Office 365 environment, you could also push that directly to the service, which is Office 365. In other words, that data is then available in the cloud as opposed to locally on somebody's application. And exactly the same thing happens if I had to go into any record and select print. I could print to local, print to cloud. The functionality remains the same even though I'm accessing this in a particular place. And as I was going to earlier, in the Role Center, you'll see that the Role Center on the browser, I've now changed user and I'm now on the browser. I can view exactly the same information. Again, a browser presents the information slightly differently, but realistically, it is the same information, and therefore, when I go in here, I get exactly the same experience. So I'm here as my browser, and you can see over here, Tectura Nav Asia Cloud App.net. That is my access point to my cloud instance in Singapore. And over here, I'm now presenting the same data that I was showing you from the client in a web browser environment. So a true web client, both of which, the web client and the native client, are calling the data directly from the cloud instance. So Dynamics NAV, a true cloud environment. Going back into Dynamics NAV over here, a number of other things that I just like to talk about in talking about this as a foundation for your current and your future operational requirements. One of the things that is delivered within NAV is a full financial application. So again, when I've logged in over here, I've selected my company, and I can have multiple companies. I can have multiple languages. Within that company, I've then got all of my financial functionality. So what I'd like to do here is just go to the functional areas and just a quick walkthrough for those who may not be familiar with Dynamics NAV and what it covers. In the area of financial management, the classical functions, your general ledger, your financial reporting capability, cash management, cost accounting, cash flow, receivables, payables, fixed assets, inventory. So again, your financial management area. In addition to that, we also cover a number of other operational areas. Sales and marketing related to this, covering my sales order entry, my order processing. My marketing being my CRM capabilities for campaigns, for segments, for opportunities, and opportunity management. Purchasing, covering the whole functional area around purchasing, purchase planning, order processing, inventory, and costing. That is outside of the materials requirements planning, which comes in the manufacturing area. So manufacturing covers product design, capacity planning, materials requirements planning, execution, and costing. And again, that also covers both simple manufacturing assembly and kitting, as well as discrete manufacturing. Job costing and resource planning covers the area around projects and jobs, while resource planning, the people, machines, and equipment required to do those, and the availability and planning. Service management, after-sales service contracts, order processing, planning, and dispatching, and human resources to support those as a human resources register. And again, also the other area I neglected to mention, warehousing, covering the area around your warehouse, receipting, storage, picking, and shipping. So all of the capabilities around the warehouse area. Now, one of the things that's fundamentally important with all this is obviously visibility of information. In an integrated ERP environment, the ability to view information easily. One of the areas that Microsoft deliver over here is within the role center is the ability to deliver views of data. Now, underpinning this is a number of structures, but what I would like to do is simply use a very simple example over here to show you an example of that. I want to have a look at an analysis of information. And what I have over here is a number of these analyses created. You will see over here I have a revenue analysis, I have a departmental expenditure, I have a customer group, and I have a campaign analysis for retail. Those are views that I have created by the data, and one of the key components here you'll notice are the dimensions, the segments or the analysis codes by which I want to report on that. So over here I've selected revenue, and I've picked the classical view, general ledger account by period. So this is me as an accountant wanting to view the data. I've filtered the accounts, I haven't filtered anything else, and I've said I want to see the actual amounts, and how do I want to view those? I want to break that up by year. Let's have a look at that information. When I open that information up, what that now does is that gives me a view that has that structure built up. So over here, as I said, the classical view, revenue by period. And again, I can change those by simply changing those filters. But what's really important here is that when I create the structure of the view of the data, that I'm able to drill down on that and see what makes that up. So what makes up that revenue for that period? Well, there I can see it over there. That particular transaction over here, what makes up that transaction? Well, if I go into that, I can go and view that. I can select the transaction, and I can drill down on that. So I can now get down to the source of that particular information. So again, what we're doing here is we're providing a full drill down path to the source of that particular information. And again, I can change that, change the parameters. But where I want to take you with this is that as I go through each of these functional areas here, what that does is that enables me to set those views for any of these areas. For example, if I had to go into my sales area, again, I've got analysis views over here of my sales, which allow me to go in and interrogate that particular data. So go in and see my sales by customer, sales statistics, salesperson statistics. If I go into inventory, I can go and do the same thing. So I can go and view my inventory analysis, inventory availability. What's my stock availability across the organization with parameters to view all of that. And while I'm mentioning it again, what I'm calling up over here is a SQL reporting services view. I want to underline the fact that what we're doing here from a reporting perspective is we're using standard Microsoft technology. So again, what you're seeing here is delivered with a Microsoft technology and enables me to publish it to Excel, to PDF, to Word, or I could email it, or if I'm really wanting to, even print that list. So again, the functional areas all underpinned with some reporting, but the reporting all delivered through the standard Microsoft technologies. Okay, I've come to the end of the demonstration I wanted to run through. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to open this up to any questions. Take any questions from the floor. As I said, this up to now, this part of the recording, we are going to make available on our website. So if you have if you have any colleagues who'd like to go and view this, it'll be available, and we'll send you a notification of that. So, any questions?